So Mark Rutte just got caught. He went on American television, looked into the camera, and told Washington that Europe was on board with their military strategy in the Middle East. And then, of course, almost immediately, Germany, France, Spain, Italy all said, no, we're not.
That is not a small communication. The Secretary-General of NATO committed the entire alliance to a military strategy that the alliance had never agreed to. And today, we're going to show you exactly how that happened and what it means for the price of oil, your grocery bill, and Canada's standing in the world.
Because this is not just a story about NATO politics. This is a story about who gets to make decisions that affect your mortgage, your pension, your retirement savings, and whether Canada is finally the country in the room saying, not this guy.
Okay, so here's what makes this story different. While Rutte was on television doing just that, Canada's Mark Carney was doing something else entirely. He looked at this situation and said, "We support safe shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, but we do not support this war, and we were not consulted before it started."
And I want you to hear why that's not weakness here. That is what a country with long-term memory looks like. Carney was really explicit here. He said Canada sees Iran as a major source of instability and supports preventing it from getting a nuclear weapon. That part is not in question. But he also said international law binds everybody, all belligerents, and that rapid de-escalation is the only responsible path forward.
And that's a very different posture from Washington's position, which is essentially, we started the fire, now who wants to grab a hose and follow us into the smoke? Canada chose a different lane. And as we are going to show you, so did every major European power. Rutte just forgot to tell them that they had already agreed to it.
So let's walk through exactly what happened, because once you see the sequence of all the events, the whole thing really clicks into place. On February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launched those strikes in Iran. No UN engagement, no ally consultation, it just happened.
Carney's response was pointed and deliberate. He called it another failure of the international order. In diplomatic language, that is about as unfriendly as it gets. And that is Canada saying, hey, don't put our name on your homework. We did not work on this project.
Then, Trump started demanding allied help in the Strait of Hormuz. And when allies hesitated, well, then he called them cowards. He said that NATO without the U.S. was a paper tiger. Think about what that tells you. If the alliance were truly united, the way Rutte is suggesting in his television interview, the president of its biggest military power would not be publicly shaming the rest of the alliance.
Obviously, he needs us, and it's not a paper tiger without them. He needs this alliance, and he should have consulted us first. And that is where Rutte stepped in and made it worse. Instead of reflecting what member governments were actually saying, he went on television and spoke as though consensus already existed, as though everyone had emotionally processed the mess, reached an agreement, and was just waiting for the calendar to clear. What does Trump have on him?
I don't know. And every major European power, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, has already said, this is not our war. Germany's president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, called it. And these are his words: a politically disastrous mistake, an avoidable, unnecessary war. That's not a strongly worded letter. That is a head of state rejecting the entire premise of what the alliance's Secretary-General had just told Washington.
And France even went further. France's army chief, the head of the French military, said the United States has become so unpredictable that it does not even bother to inform allies when it launches military operations. When the top general of a major NATO country says that out loud, in public, that is not a tone disagreement. That is a warning that the foundational trust inside the alliance is starting to crack. Now, what Rutte did worked for Trump because he got his base thinking now that everyone is on board with them, and that is all he needed to do. His job was done. Maybe money switched hands. Maybe some blackmail happened. But whatever it is, now the mega base thinks that NATO's on board.
Now, I want to talk about why this matters for Canada, because this is where it stops being about faraway diplomacy and starts being about your life. About 1/5 of the world's oil and LNG moves through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. So when that waterway is disrupted like it is now, the shot doesn't stay in the Gulf, it travels fast.
LNG is liquefied natural gas. When the supply gets squeezed, the prices go up. And that price increase doesn't stop at the gas station. It moves into everything that gets shipped by truck, which is almost everything in a grocery store. It moves into airline fuel costs, which means your flights get more expensive. It moves into home heating. And if energy inflation gets sticky enough, central banks, including the Bank of Canada, may have to keep interest rates higher for longer to fight it.
And if you lived through the 80s, remember those Reagan years? Well, you know exactly what that means. Interest rates at 18, 19, 20%. Mortgages that consumed half a family's income. Businesses could not even borrow to survive. Well, we're not there yet, but the mechanism is exactly the same. Energy shocks create inflation. Inflation forces rate decisions. Rate decisions land on your mortgage renewal, your line of credit, and your small business plan.
This is why Canadians should care deeply about what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, even though the missiles are flying halfway around the world. The question isn't whether the strait matters, because everyone agrees it matters. The question is, what is the right way to protect it? And that is exactly where Rutte was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, here's the distinction that keeps getting blurred, and it's important. Europe is not saying that they don't care about safe shipping. They're saying that safe shipping and supporting Washington's war are not the exact same thing, and Rutte treated them exactly as they are.
Think of it this way. You can believe that a highway needs to stay open without agreeing to jump into the car with the guy who caused the pileup. Europe is saying the strait matters. It's not saying that Washington gets to cause the crash and then hand everybody else the repair bill.
And that is the European position right now. Several governments explicitly tied any practical support to ending hostilities first. De-escalation as a precondition, not an afterthought. Rutte took that nuanced conditional support and translated it into something that sounded like a green light. It definitely was not.
And listen, the Secretary-General of NATO is not a president. He does not have the authority to speak for member governments before those governments have spoken. His job is to translate the actual center of gravity inside the alliance, not to start describing a consensus that does not yet exist. That is where his credibility took a hit. Or maybe it was when he called Trump daddy. That might have done it in the first place.
That definitely did it for me. And there's another layer here that matters as well. Rutte may not just be misreading Europe, he may be trying to keep Trump engaged in NATO by sounding more aligned with Washington than European governments actually are. And that might make sense if your goal is to flatter the White House for 5 minutes, but if your real job is actually representing member governments, that's a dangerous game. Because once allies think that the Secretary General is freelancing to keep Trump happy, well, trust inside that alliance gets a lot harder to rebuild.
I think he should be fired. Can you fire a NATO chief? I don't know. So at some point, the question stops being whether this was a bad interview and starts becoming whether Rutte is still doing the job the alliance actually needs him to do. Because if the Secretary General is speaking for Washington more clearly than he is speaking for NATO, well, that is a problem.
So why does this even matter beyond the Iran story? Well, because NATO is not just a pile of ships and tanks, it's a confidence machine. The entire thing runs on trust. Trust that consultation is real, that leadership reflects what members actually believe, and that nobody wakes up one morning to find that they've been volunteered into somebody else's war by a TV interview.
When that trust phrase, you get slower crisis response, mixed signals to energy markets, as well as more uncertainty for anyone importing fuel, food, or goods from overseas. And an alliance where the United States has already made it clear it will act unilaterally without informing allies, let alone consulting them, the credibility of the people trying to hold everyone together becomes the whole ballgame.
And right now, Mark Rutte is carrying that credibility problem entirely on his own because it's of his own making. The governments he is supposed to represent have already contradicted him in public. They didn't do it quietly, they did it loudly, clearly, and on the record. Now that doesn't just make Rutte look bad, it tells every single member government that the Secretary General may not be representing their actual positions when it matters most.
But the damage seems to already be done, especially in America. Which brings us back to Canada. And I want to be clear about something. Canada is not pretending to run the world. We don't control the Strait of Hormuz, and we don't stop this war. But what Canada is doing is staking out a position that a large number of middle powers are quietly looking for. We oppose Iran's aggression. We support secure shipping, insist on international law, demand proper consultation, and coordinate through existing frameworks like the G7, not through improvised coalitions assembled by whoever has the most aircraft carriers.
Carney was on the phone with Macron specifically about this, building that coordination, making the case for de-escalation, positioning Canada in the diplomatic wiring rather than just standing by waiting for Washington to sign rules. That's not flashy, but this is what serious diplomacy looks like. Less swagger and more precision.
And there's a deeper lesson here for Canadians. For a long time, being a serious ally was defined as automatic alignment with Washington. But that model only works when Washington is predictable and good. When your biggest ally launches military operations without informing you, publicly insults partners who hesitate, and then demand backup after the fact, well, saying no is not disloyalty. Sometimes saying no is exactly what competence looks like.
And Canada said no in a way that kept its credibility intact, kept its alliances with European partners warm, and positioned itself as a country that other middle powers can actually work with. In a world where the U.S. foreign policy is becoming increasingly hard to predict, that is a lane worth occupying. And right now, Canada is right in the middle of it.
So here's where Dave and I land. Mark Rutte spoke for an alliance that had not agreed to what he was describing. It baffles my mind. The alliance's biggest members contradicted him in public. Canada positions itself as the responsible voice, the country that can hold the line on international law while still being serious about security. And the Strait of Hormuz remains the pressure point where all of this connects to your energy costs, your grocery bills, and your mortgage.
The question is whether this fracture is manageable or whether this is the moment historians look back on and say, that's when NATO's political authority began to hollow out and started to fall apart.
And we want to know what you think. Is Mark Rutte working for NATO, or is he working for Washington? And do you think Europe and Canada hold the line, or does Trump eventually drag all of us into his war anyway?
Drop your prediction below because we want to hear from you and we read every single one of those comments.
So thanks for watching, everyone. We look forward to hearing from you, and we will see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.